Sutter's Fort in the 1840s was an agricultural and manufacturing center. This was a place of business where people made materials for sale. But while there was 30 to 50 people working inside the fort, about 100 to 200 workers were needed outside the fort, and that was mainly for agricultural production and everything that involved this machine behind me, a grist mill. The primary crop grown at Sutter's Fort was wheat. And this whole idea of Sacramento being the breadbasket of California has its beginnings here at Sutter's Fort. There were hundreds and hundreds of acres of wheat outside the fort. And especially around the summer is when harvest time would begin. And that harvest involved the most workers needed, and main people that were harvesting this wheat were native people from local villages. Iron was pretty hard to come by, so using scythes and sickles were few. Some were using barrel hoops or literally pulling out the wheat with their bare hands. Once the wheat was harvested, it would then need to be threshed, where it's literally being crushed. Now you could use something like a flail, or you would literally line threshing floors, which are large wooden floors, and literally have horses trample across it to break up the wheat. Once your wheat has been broken up, then it would need to be winnowed, where you're literally blowing away all the lighter stuff from the wheat itself. So on a windy day, the wheat would be brought up into the bastion, thrown out the window. The wind would blow away the chaff, the shell from the wheat, and any bits of straw falling to the ground would be your wheat, ready for the grist mill. However, there was so much wheat, much of it needed to be stored in granaries before it was time for it to be ground at the grist mill itself. Now, Sutter had two sets of millstones that he got from Fort Ross when he purchased Fort Ross from the Russian-American Fur Company in 1841. Set of millstones in operation and another set being repaired. The mill was operating almost 24 hours a day. This was the only grist mill in the area was here at Sutter's Fort from 1841 until 1847. Where Jared Sheldon will have a grist mill at his Rancho Omachumnis near what is today Slough House. Mariano Vallejo had a grist mill as well, but even if you had a rancho near Sutter's Fort, you still had to bring your wheat here to have it ground into flour. Now, how a grist mill operates, you take your wheat and you put it in this big black funnel called the hopper. The hopper funnels the wheat between these two millstones. The bottom stone is the bed stone. It doesn't move. The top stone is the runner stone. It does move. It's actually, the runner stone is held on a big metal pin here in the middle. It's connected to this log, and there's grooves on the inside called the lands and furrows. That's what actually would catch the wheat and grind it into flour. The original millstones were about 3 times larger than this, would be powered by 4 mules. The rotation of the runner stone will push that wheat through the lands and furrows and grind it into flour. Now, if you've ever watched an old Western or anything like that, and you saw sacks of flour that have X's on them, that would represent the number of times it would have went through a grist mill. About 3 to 4 times it would need to go through a grist mill before it is ground enough to bake bread. Now, a miller would oversee the operations of a grist mill, making sure that the animal was not going too fast, because when there's too much speed, it could cause friction or heat. And you don't want to burn the flour, so often a miller would lean down and smell to make sure they're not smelling burnt flour. And that's where you get the origin of the phrase, keep your nose to the grindstone, comes from. Now, what were they doing with all this flour? Well, it was needed at the bakery for baking bread for all the workers, but also hardtack for sale. Flour was actually a major trading item here in California at this time because not that many people had a grist mill. And Sutter had a lot of debts. And he was actually paying his debt off in barrels of flour and wheat for his purchase of Fort Ross from the Russian American Fur Company. He had bought Fort Ross for $30,000 on credit, and still by 1848, he owed the company almost $20,000.